18. Eliminating excuses. One of the most interesting aspects of human nature is our ability to explain our own behavior. Whenever we fail to follow through on a commitment, postpone an important task, abandon a goal, or fall short of our expectations, there is usually a reason. Sometimes that reason is legitimate. Life can be unpredictable, and there are moments when circumstances genuinely make progress difficult. Unexpected challenges arise, responsibilities increase, and situations occur that no amount of planning could have anticipated. However, there is an important distinction between a reason and an excuse. A reason helps us understand what happened. An excuse helps us avoid responsibility for what happened. The difference may appear subtle, but its impact on personal growth is enormous. People who consistently improve their lives are not necessarily individuals who encounter fewer obstacles. More often, they are individuals who have developed the habit of responding differently to obstacles. Instead of immediately searching for explanations that remove responsibility, they look for ways to adapt, adjust, and continue moving forward. This does not mean they ignore reality. It does not mean they deny difficulties or pretend every challenge can be overcome through willpower alone. Rather, they refuse to allow obstacles to become permanent justifications for inaction. Excuses are often far more convincing than we realize because they usually contain an element of truth. A person may genuinely be busy. They may genuinely be tired. They may genuinely lack certain resources or opportunities. The problem begins when these facts become the entire story. Imagine someone who has wanted to improve their physical health for several years. Whenever the subject arises, they explain that they are too busy to exercise. There may be truth in that statement. Their schedule may indeed be demanding. Yet if years pass and no meaningful changes occur, it becomes worth asking whether the schedule is the real obstacle or whether it has become a convenient explanation that protects them from confronting a more uncomfortable reality. Perhaps the issue is not time, but priorities. Perhaps the issue is not knowledge, but consistency. Perhaps the issue is not circumstances, but commitment. These possibilities can feel uncomfortable because they shift attention inward. And that is precisely why excuses are so appealing. They allow us to direct our focus outward. When responsibility remains outside ourselves, we are protected from disappointment. If circumstances are entirely to blame, then we never have to question our choices. If other people are responsible for our lack of progress, then we never have to examine our habits. If success depends solely on factors beyond our control, then failure becomes easier to explain. The short-term benefit of excuses is emotional comfort. The long-term cost is personal power. Every excuse carries an unspoken message. It says, "There is nothing I can do." Whether that message is spoken aloud or not, the effect remains the same. The more frequently a person repeats it, the more powerless they begin to feel. Over time, opportunities that once seemed possible begin to appear unreachable. Ambition decreases, effort declines, expectations shrink. Eventually, the excuse becomes part of identity. This process rarely happens consciously. Very few people decide to limit themselves deliberately. More often, limitations emerge gradually through repeated patterns of thinking. A person encounters an obstacle, creates an explanation, repeats that explanation often enough, and eventually begins treating it as an unquestionable truth. One of the most powerful shifts a person can make is learning to replace excuses with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why can't I do this?" they begin asking, "How could I do this?" The difference between these two questions is profound. The first question encourages the mind to search for limitations, The second encourages the mind to search for possibilities. Neither question changes reality immediately, but they influence how reality is approached. Consider two individuals facing the same challenge. Both encounter a significant setback while working toward an important goal. The first focuses primarily on why the situation is unfair and why progress is now impossible. The second acknowledges the setback, but begins exploring alternatives. Neither person enjoys the obstacle. Neither person wanted the setback. Yet one remains focused on what has been lost, while the other focuses on what remains possible. Over time, these different perspectives lead to dramatically different outcomes. This is not because optimism magically eliminates problems. It is because attention influences action. The things we focus on tend to shape the decisions we make. If we focus exclusively on limitations, our options appear limited. If we focus on possibilities, new options often emerge. Another important aspect of excuses is that they frequently disguise fear. Someone may claim they do not have enough time to start a business when the deeper concern is the possibility of failure. Another person may insist they are waiting for the right opportunity when the real issue is uncertainty. Someone else may say they are not ready when, in reality, they fear criticism or rejection. The excuse becomes a socially acceptable explanation for an emotional challenge that feels more difficult to confront directly. Recognizing this pattern requires honesty. It requires the willingness to ask difficult questions. What am I avoiding? What am I afraid of? What would happen if I stopped using this explanation? The answers are not always comfortable, but they are often revealing. As we have discussed throughout this journey, personal growth rarely begins with changing circumstances. It begins with increasing awareness. Once you become aware of an excuse, you gain the ability to challenge it. Once you challenge it, you create the possibility of choosing a different response. This does not mean every goal will be achieved immediately. It does not mean obstacles will disappear. It simply means that your energy is directed toward progress rather than justification. The goal is not to become a person who never struggles. The goal is to become a person who remains honest about the difference between genuine obstacles and self-imposed limitations. When that distinction becomes clear, a remarkable thing happens. You begin reclaiming responsibility for areas of life that once felt outside your control. You stop asking whether conditions are perfect. You stop waiting for ideal circumstances. You stop expecting confidence to arrive before action. Instead, you begin working with what is available today. And while that approach may seem less dramatic than waiting for a breakthrough, it is far more effective. Most meaningful change begins the moment. Excuses lose their influence, not because life becomes easier, but because responsibility becomes stronger than avoidance. Reflection, questions. 1. What excuse do you use most often when avoiding an important goal? 2. Is that excuse a genuine obstacle, a temporary challenge, or a habitual explanation? 3. What fear might be hiding behind that excuse? 4. How has this excuse affected your progress over time? 5. What would change if you stopped using it? Daily action step. Choose one excuse that appears regularly in your life. Write it down. Then write 3 actions you could take despite that excuse. Focus on what remains possible rather than what feels difficult. Commit to taking one of those actions today. Success affirmation. I take responsibility for my choices and focus on what I can control. I release excuses, embrace ownership, and move forward with courage, honesty, and purpose.